Have you ever wondered why one question followed Paris Jackson for most of her life, despite everything else she endured? Blue eyes, blonde hair, pale skin. To millions of people, that was enough to start doubting her. How could the daughter of Michael Jackson, one of the most famous black artists in history, look the way she does? It became a public obsession. But was the world asking the wrong question the entire time? Or was it easier to focus on appearance than confront the complexity of identity, family, and truth? Because behind the headlines, the rumors, and the endless tabloid speculation, there was a much deeper story. One about identity, family, and a daughter trying to protect the truth of the man she called father. And in the end, Paris herself may have given the only answer that actually matters. But did anyone truly listen? It all started in 1996. While the world saw Michael Jackson as untouchable, a global superstar almost beyond normal life, he quietly married a woman named Debbie Rowe in Sydney, Australia. She wasn't famous. She wasn't part of Hollywood. So why her? She was a dermatology nurse from Beverly Hills who had known Michael for years through his longtime dermatologist, Dr. Arnold Klein. Their connection was not built in red carpets or publicity events, but in private medical rooms and quiet conversations away from the public eye. Even then, people were suspicious. There was no public romance. No love story in magazines. No red carpet appearances. Then suddenly, marriage. So naturally, people asked, was this really a marriage, or was it something else entirely? The answer seemed simple at first. Michael deeply wanted children. He had spoken privately for years about wanting a real family away from the spotlight. But how does someone like him, constantly watched, constantly judged, build something as private and fragile as a family? Debbie, who cared for him and reportedly saw him as a close friend, agreed to help make that dream a reality. But what did help really mean in a situation like this? And can something so personal ever remain simple when the entire world is watching? Their first child, Prince, was born in 1997. Paris followed in 1998. Michael was listed as the father. Legally, publicly, and personally, these were his children. But even at that moment, the public couldn't resist asking, what was happening behind closed doors? Was this the beginning of a traditional family, or something far more complicated? By 2000, the marriage ended. Debbie gave Michael full custody, accepted a reported financial settlement, and stepped away from public life. To most people, the story was over. But was it really over, or was it just the beginning of years of unanswered questions? Because after Michael's death in 2009, everything changed. Suddenly, whispers that had once stayed in the shadows became global headlines. And Debbie Rowe herself added fuel to the fire. In one explosive interview, she described their marriage as more of a business arrangement than a traditional relationship. She said they never truly lived like husband and wife. And then came the statement that shook everything. She suggested that Michael had wanted children so deeply that the process involved artificial insemination, and implied that an unspecified donor may have been involved. Not necessarily Michael. And that single implication changed the tone of the entire conversation. Think about that for a moment. If the children's own mother was publicly suggesting Michael might not be the biological father, then what did that mean for everything the world believed? Was the identity of a global icon's children suddenly uncertain? The media exploded. Headlines spread everywhere. Was Michael really Paris's biological father? Was there another man involved? And if so, who could it possibly be, and why had it remained hidden for so long? But here's where things became even more complicated. Debbie's story didn't stay consistent. In later interviews, she pushed back against some of those earlier interpretations. She confirmed she was the biological mother and softened her claims about donation and medical involvement. She even rebuilt her relationship with Paris over time, with reports suggesting they grew close again by the mid-2010s. So which version was true? The version spoken in grief and chaos? Or the one spoken years later, when time had passed and emotions had settled? And more importantly, why did the story keep changing? The media didn't care about consistency. Contradiction creates clicks. And soon, two more men entered the story, each adding another layer of confusion. The first was Mark Lester. Many people knew him as the child star from the 1968 film Oliver, But he was also a long-time close friend of Michael Jackson, close enough to become Paris's godfather. After Michael's death, Lester made a shocking claim. He said he had donated sperm to Michael years earlier and believed there was a real possibility he could be the biological father of Prince and Paris. Yes, he said it publicly. And that raised immediate questions. Why speak out now, after so many years of silence? Was this an honest revelation, or a moment of opportunism in the spotlight of global attention? He even pointed to physical similarities between Paris and his own daughter, suggesting resemblance as possible evidence. But can appearance ever truly serve as proof of identity? Or is that exactly how rumors are born? He offered to take a DNA test. But was that confidence or performance? Then there was Dr. Arnold Klein, Michael's longtime dermatologist, Debbie's employer, a man deeply connected to both of them. When asked directly if he was the biological father, his answer only deepened suspicion. He didn't give a firm denial. Instead, he carefully stated that, to the best of his knowledge, he was not the father. Why choose such cautious language unless there was something to avoid saying outright? Or was it simply a doctor trying to avoid legal or ethical complications? Then in 2015, Klein made things worse. He posted a side-by-side photo of himself and Prince Jackson online with a cryptic caption. Just one letter, H. One letter. That's all it took. The internet erupted instantly. People analyzed facial structure, jawlines, noses, eye spacing, turning identity into a public investigation. But here's the question. When did a child's identity become a public debate? The post was deleted, but screenshots lived forever. And before any clarity could emerge, Klein passed away. Whatever truth he might have known disappeared with him. Mark Lester later softened his own claims, suggesting that if there was any donor involved, it might have been someone else entirely, not necessarily him. So once again, certainty dissolved into ambiguity. No confirmation. No resolution. Just layers of shifting stories. And right in the middle of all of it was Paris Jackson herself. Imagine being a teenager and watching the world debate whether your father was really your father. Imagine strangers using your face as evidence in an argument you never agreed to join. Your skin. Your eyes. Your hair. Your existence. Paris was only 11 when Michael died. She was still grieving when tabloids began dissecting her identity like a puzzle meant for public entertainment. By her teenage years, she was already battling serious personal struggles, mental health issues, addiction challenges, emotional trauma, and the weight of constant visibility. But how much of that pressure came from grief? And how much came from the world refusing to let her simply exist? She wasn't just mourning her father. She was being told by millions of strangers that maybe he was never truly hers to mourn. What does that kind of uncertainty do to a developing identity? And there was another layer the world often overlooked. Race. Michael raised Paris to understand her heritage and to be proud of it. He told her she was black. He taught her about identity beyond appearance, beyond what the world assumed. But the outside world kept repeating something different. You don't look black enough. What does that sentence even mean in a world where identity is far more complex than appearance? And who gets to decide what someone is enough of? Maybe the real question was never about biology at all. Maybe it was about society's need to simplify something that was never simple in the first place. Because in the end, what defines a father? DNA or devotion? Blood or presence? And when a child grows up being loved, raised, and protected, does speculation from the outside world ever outweigh that lived reality? Paris Jackson has spoken in her own ways over time, often emphasizing her bond with Michael and pushing back against reductionist narratives. But even her voice, at times, gets drowned out by louder speculation. So the question still hangs in the air like a shadow that refuses to move on. Why did the world become so obsessed with proving who her father was, instead of understanding who she became because of him? And maybe an even more uncomfortable question follows quietly behind it. Was the truth ever really the point, or was the mystery always more entertaining? Think about how strange that is when you slow it down. A young woman growing up under constant observation, not for her choices, not for her achievements, but for a debate she never asked to be part of. A debate built on assumptions, speculation, and the public's need to turn real lives into endless conversation pieces. What does it do to a person when their identity becomes something strangers feel entitled to debate? Paris Jackson never chose the noise. She simply grew up inside it. And from the outside, it often looked less like a life and more like a public courtroom where she was both the subject and the silent witness. From the beginning, she was surrounded by a story that wasn't fully hers. The daughter of the world's most famous pop icon, Michael Jackson, she was born into a legacy that the world already had strong opinions about. But instead of letting her grow into her own identity, many people seemed more interested in dissecting where she came from physically. As if identity could be reduced to measurements. As if family could be verified like a document. As if love leaves behind a laboratory signature. And maybe the most unsettling part is how normal it all became. Strangers online discussing her appearance as if it were evidence. Comment sections turning her life into a puzzle. Headlines circling back again and again to the same question, no matter what she was actually doing at the time. Every interview. Every public appearance. Every milestone in her career. It all seemed to bend back toward one repeated question. Who is your real father? But what does real even mean in that sentence? Is a father defined by biology alone? Or is it defined by presence, memory, protection, and love? These are not simple questions, and yet the world kept asking them as if they were. At some point, the obsession stopped feeling like curiosity and started feeling like consumption. A life being picked apart not to understand it, but to keep it interesting. And that raises another question. When does curiosity become cruelty dressed up as interest? Paris grew up carrying that tension quietly. Behind the headlines and speculation was a childhood shaped by something far more intimate than public theory. Daily life with a father figure who, despite his global fame, tried to create something resembling normality inside an extremely abnormal world. She has spoken over the years about how Michael Jackson raised her and her siblings with intention, how he tried to protect their privacy in a world that constantly tried to take it away. Homeschooling, shared moments at home, music, laughter, discipline, and care. Not the curated version the world often imagines, but something quieter and more human. But the public rarely holds onto quiet details. Drama is louder. Speculation spreads faster. And so the questions persisted anyway. Even as she grew older and stepped into her own identity, the same narrative followed her like a loop that never quite breaks. In 2017, she finally addressed it directly in an interview with Rolling Stone. There was no hesitation, no ambiguity, no attempt to dance around expectations. She said clearly that Michael Jackson was her father. Not as a public statement designed to convince others, but as a personal truth she had lived her entire life. Why would she need to justify something that shaped her childhood? Why should she have to defend love? She also made a point that many people overlooked, even though it was central to the entire discussion. Human appearance is not a reliable map of ancestry. Genetics are complex. Identity is not always visually predictable. Families do not always look the way outsiders expect them to look. And yet, why do people still rely so heavily on appearance as proof of belonging? Why is the human eye still treated like a biological judge? She even referenced examples like actor Wentworth Miller, whose background has often surprised people because it doesn't fit simplified expectations. The point wasn't comparison, it was contradiction. Reality rarely fits neatly into the boxes people try to build for it. Her response was calm, measured, grounded, and, in many ways, final. It should have ended there. But stories that generate attention rarely end when they should. Because controversy has its own momentum. And once a narrative becomes profitable, it has a way of recycling itself. Years later, in 2023, Paris appeared in the Amazon series Swarm. It was a role, fiction, performance, storytelling. But in the modern internet landscape, context often matters less than fragments. One line, one reference, one misunderstood moment was enough to reignite old speculation. Suddenly, timelines filled again with familiar arguments. Old articles resurfaced. Discussions that had already been addressed returned as if nothing had ever been said. Why does repetition feel like discovery to so many people online? Why does an old rumor feel new again when it reappears in a different format? This time, Paris didn't rush to respond. And maybe that silence was its own answer. Instead of feeding the cycle, she continued building her life in directions that had nothing to do with public debates about her origin. She focused on music, on acting, on modeling, on mental health, on recovery, on the quiet, difficult process of becoming a person beyond inherited narratives. Because what happens when someone decides they will no longer live inside the story others built for them? In 2024, she walked at Paris Fashion Week, stepping onto a runway not as an extension of someone else's name, but as an individual artist shaping her own presence in a different world. Cameras flashed, audiences watched, and for a moment, she existed outside the constant noise of speculation. But even then, the internet did not fully let go. Fake documents appeared. AI-generated claims circulated. Old rumors were repackaged into new formats designed for clicks and attention. No verified source supported them. No credible evidence backed them. But did that matter in a space where engagement often outweighs accuracy? And so the cycle repeated itself again. Which leads to another question worth sitting with. If a false story is repeated enough times, does it start to feel like truth simply because it is familiar? Through all of it, one thing remained consistent about Paris Jackson's position. She has always defined fatherhood through lived experience, not genetic testing. Love, presence, protection, upbringing, these are the things she has repeatedly pointed to when speaking about her father. Not laboratory results. Not public approval. Not online consensus. And perhaps that is where the disconnect lies between her perspective and the world's obsession. People often want certainty in places where human experience is actually far more complex. They want simple answers to emotional realities. But families are not always simple. And grief, legacy, and love rarely behave in ways that satisfy public curiosity. Michael Jackson, for all his complexity and global scrutiny, raised his children within a carefully constructed world meant to shield them from parts of the fame he lived with every day. Whether people fully understand his choices or not, that intention shaped Paris's experience of childhood in ways that mattered deeply to her. So maybe the question was never truly about proving anything at all. Maybe it was about why the public felt entitled to keep asking. Who benefits from turning someone's identity into an ongoing debate? Why does certainty about someone else's life feel so important to strangers? And what does it say about us when we prioritize mystery over humanity? Paris inherited a narrative she did not create. She did not launch the rumors. She did not design the headlines. She did not start the speculation. She simply grew up inside its echo. And through it all, she kept moving forward. Not by answering every repetition, but by building something that existed outside of it. So the question remains, maybe more relevant now than ever. What actually makes someone a parent? Is it biology? Or is it the person who shows up, stays, raises, protects, and loves through the noise of the world? And perhaps the final question is even harder to ignore. If she has already answered this for herself, why does the world still insist on rewriting her answer? And more importantly, when does a person finally get to be more than the question everyone keeps asking about them?